Order then. You ready? I'd like to call this Council and Budget Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
All members of council are present, your worship, with the exception of Councilor Nutt.
There are no announcements, no addendum. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? There being none, I'm going to hand the chair over to Councilor McDermott, the Vice Chair of Corporate Services.
Thank you, Worship, and welcome to the Water and Sewer Operating Budget. We'll go right to our presentation with our Director of Corporate Services, Jonathan Jansen. Mr. Jansen.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to all in attendance, including those who are live streaming tonight. This is the second meeting for our 2018 budget process, and this presentation focuses on report CBC 03 2018, which is on the agenda. As well, later we will be addressing CBC 02 for the fees and charges. The agenda for tonight's presentation includes a review of some of the highlights of our service delivery, a look at the budget inputs for the 2018 and forecasted years, the budget rate setting exercise, some of the risks and opportunities associated with this year's budget. We'll then review the next steps in the budget timetable for this year and discuss any presentation questions. So an overview of the service delivery objectives of our water and wastewater utility. First and foremost, safe drinking water, as well as a reliable system that provides the availability, flow, and pressure of our water system. Legislated full cost recovery, which means that our water and wastewater system does not rely on any tax support. And it fully accounts for the current costs, avoiding any burden to the future generations, as well as a commitment to the quality of life for our residents, which includes eliminating basement flooding and sewer backups associated with extraneous flow. And as is most of the focus tonight, the cost controls, as well as protection of our natural environment. So council's role is to support the town's commitment to our drinking water quality management system, or DWQMS. It involves maintaining compliance and continuous improvement of our quality management system. Council's been provided with a number of documents in the past, including Taking Care of Your Drinking Water, a guide for members of municipal councils document, as well as training last September in 2016 from the Walkerton Clean Water Center. That was an education session for council, as well as an opportunity to discuss challenges and issues associated with our system. This slide shows the two primary areas or departments' responsibilities with our water and wastewater. The corporate services area is responsible for the billing and collections. Our community services department provides customer service as well as digital services. And then infrastructure services, led by Mr. Walsh, includes the engineering and capital programs, as well as the water and wastewater division with their direct operations, maintenance, and compliance work. All these areas, and in particular the green box at the top, is a component that is assigned to the utility through program support allocations to reflect the nature of the levy-funded positions that also indirectly support the utility. This graphic council has seen over the last number of years. It's something that probably requires an update at this point, but it does help to illustrate the extent of our system and the impacts on the end users. So steps 1 through 11 demonstrate the sources of water, the treatment, which involves the region's role, all the way through to item 11. And that one in particular shows how the significant infrastructure involved with delivering our water results in users both that could potentially be a single grandmother or a larger family. But both of those are the end users of significant fixed costs. Some corporate operational commitments that we have. Legislative compliance is a big area that continues to grow. We are subject to significant provincial requirements to ensure that we're complying and we're maintaining our system. We perform our own internal audit annually with a group of trained staff to ensure that we're as well keeping up with the plans that we've set out. We have a surveillance audit by an accreditation body that we've been very successful with. We're subject to a compliance audit from the Ministry of Environment as well, annually to ensure compliance. So a number of different legislative oversight to the utilities. Another commitment is to reduce our non-revenue water volumes or unbilled water. This is a significant problem. The extent of the full problem the town can never do away with, but there are certain areas we target to reduce this. The one is with capital investment for water main replacement. Approximately a half of our distribution system is either cast iron or asbestos cement that's deteriorating at a very quick rate. So that needs to be replaced and maintained. 2018 includes $40,000 for consultants to do soundings on our system to identify leak locations on both the region and town systems. Our meter exchange program is helping to also reduce unbilled water volumes through better technology, through more accurate meters, and assistance with our billing teams to get regular, routine, accurate readings. And the leak detection program, every identified leak that's made in our system is a priority, and water main breaks are immediately addressed on a 24/7 basis. And the town is very aggressive in their efforts to reduce those numbers. Similarly, on the sewer side, we're committed to reducing the infiltration that we have in our system. This, as you can see there, is a large problem annually that most municipalities will deal with. This, again, is being addressed through capital investment to the sanitary system. We have a large number of old vitrified clay sewers that the capital is aiming to address. Continuing to prioritize completing replacement of that capital. Most recently, we completed projects on Highland, Stanton, and Courtright Streets, which should result in real reductions in infiltration in those areas. For extraneous flow, the town has annual target areas. Then we visit sewer shed areas by our pumping stations, and staff inspect the integrity of home plumbing systems is another area that the town uses, and looks for contributions or cross connections through video inspections of laterals, and we address those as they're found. Prior to assuming development, the town ensures that new construction meets Ministry of Environment standards for minimal infiltration. And then lastly, in the funding opportunity side, the town's committed to leveraging any opportunities to pursue grant funding, such as the regional CSO program, which is a competitive process. So none of that grant funding has been included for the 18 budget, but some other areas that the town was successful in 2017 on the capital side was the Clean Water and Wastewater Fund and the Ontario Community Investment Fund programs. Just highlighting a few operational challenges. Recruitment of new positions over the last few years, such as the recently hired water and wastewater manager, Adam Alcock, who's here tonight, and Shauna Mills last year as our DWQMS coordinator. Operations with water main breaks has repaired 28 water mains so far this year in 2017. This is again lower than our historical average of about 50, due primarily to some of the weather we've experienced. But we definitely, over the long term, expect to see that to go back up. We've instituted a tracking system to ensure legal requirements for commissioning new water mains is adhered to, which has created some minor challenges internally and externally, just in getting everyone acquainted to the system. You've heard over the last number of years that we expect the quality management system that's been implemented in the province for the water side to also be expanded to the sewer side, and there'll be a number of challenges associated with that. The new valve exercise program is in place and expected to expose significant repair requirements. And lastly, completing the residential meter exchange program allows us to focus on the commercial and industrial meter exchanges, which will enhance system safety and greater consumption accuracy. So we now shift into the financial requirements of the system and some of the concepts behind setting the water and wastewater budget. We'll look at the expenses and other revenues that include the regional treatment costs, the town expenses and other revenues that the town brings in for the system, as well as supplementary budget items. We'll then look at rate setting, which considers both customer volumes that we use in pricing the utility, as well as the town's billing methodology, which is a mix of both base and volumetric rates. Total 2018 expenses, budget expenses are $18.5 million. This graph shows the source of those by functional areas and demonstrates here that clearly the largest cost is our regional treatment costs at 61%. The total expenses are higher than our rate revenues, which is Appendix 2 in the report, as the town does bring in a few other non-billing revenues, such as local improvement charges, user fees, and grants. So in terms of changes over 2017, the increase for the regional treatment costs is an increase of approximately $400,000 or 2.25%. This reflects the region's budget that they approved on November 16th, which was a combined net budget increase of 2% or 2.2% on the water side and 1.9% on the wastewater side. The town share of volumes on the water is actually down over last year 1.03%. And the share of the wastewater volumes is up just over 2%. And related to the regional treatment costs, our forecast period of 2019 to 2023 forecasts a 2% increase per annum. There's no change to the regional billing formulas. Council will recall that the water is 75% variable and 25% fixed. And the wastewater is 100% fixed, and it's adjusted in the third year based on actual flows. So for the 2018 budget, this wastewater reconciliation adjustment, based on what the town actually incurred with flows in 2016, is a charge of $697,000, as volumes that we incurred were higher than originally estimated based on our historical average. And for 2019, similarly, we're tracking our usage for 2017, and we're forecasting a charge of approximately $250,000 for 2019 for the similar effect. For town expenses and other revenue, there's an overall decrease of $204,000 or 1.16%. This is an increase. We have an increase in revenue from fees in a couple areas, such as service laterals. We are losing some local improvement charge revenues that are set to expire or did expire in 2017. We have increased wages and benefits, increasing $73,000 based on the collective bargaining agreement that was negotiated earlier this year. And it includes the first full year of the 2017 supplementary staffing increase for the water and wastewater supervisor. There's some increased overhead costs for things such as fleet charges and insurance. And the largest impact in this area is the reduction in debt charges, which we have been mentioning the last couple of years coming up to this year, including matured debt of $376,000. A total decrease in debt charges of $384,000, of which the maturing debt that will no longer have any impact is $376,000. And the last bullet there, the increase to materials and services is $118,000, including an increased focus in the investigation of non-revenue water and extraneous sewer flows. We're proposing to continue both our Water Emergency Relief Fund as well as the Seniors Utility Relief Fund at the same amounts of $15,000 and $21,000 respectively that we have had for a number of years. These have been very successful programs that allow us to the town to refer those who are eligible to these programs for some relief in their bills. And lastly, on the budget inputs, the supplementary section is an increase to the budget of $201,000 or 1.14%. That's related to a decrease in cost by using $77,000 from our sewer rate stabilization reserve fund to address the increase over the prior year of the wastewater reconciliation charge. So that went from about $620,000 to $697,000. We're using some rate stabilization reserve funding as well capital reserve funding for the asset management plan update the town is proposing of $50,000. And then on the increase side, so those would both be negatives if you're tracking with this. On the increase side, it's an increase to capital contributions of the maturing debt of $328,000. And this is in keeping with the town's reserve policy, and it's net or it's decreased by the amount of the local improvement charges that have expired as well. There's no changes to our annual contributions to the rate stabilization reserves, just the amounts that we're using from those reserves. The capital budget was just presented on November 8th. The preliminary portion, of course, was just approved by bylaw last week. The water master plan in relation to capital was completed in 2017 and presented to council in June. And that definitely identified the priority issues and the funding challenges associated with the water system. The wastewater master plan is expected to be completed in 2018. As well as the AMP will be updated to reflect both of those plans above. This shows the impact of that proposed $328,000 from repurposed debt. So the town will, with that contribution, will move from last year's reserve contributions of $3.29 million to approximately $3.6 million. And here you can see that in terms of the target that the town's reserve policy has set, we move a significant amount this year from 70% to 82% by using that room from debt. Rate stabilization reserves are key to mitigating our annual increases. So these are two reserves that the town does contribute $80,000 and $100,000 respectively from the water and wastewater fund. But they are well used due to unknown regional budget increases, our unknown proportionate share of those regional costs, as well as unknown future treated volumes. As noted, for 2019, we're proposing or projecting a $250,000 charge. So there's lots of areas where our rate can swing from year to year, so that does help indeed stabilize our rates. This chart then summarizes the total of all these impacts for the water and wastewater budget. The total increase for this year in what's proposed is an increase of $397,000, bringing the total budget from $17.8 million to approximately $18.2 million. So with those costs, then the exercise becomes setting the rate. The total costs to be recovered are generated by the billing revenues. To do this, we estimate A, the customer consumption volumes on which the billings are based, and then B, bill both a fixed or a base portion and a volumetric or a variable portion. We'll look at some municipal trends and how the town compares to other municipalities with these areas. So this graph shows the total revenues that the town needs to bill for each utility, water billings representing 44%, and wastewater billings being 54%, and a small portion for the other areas of local improvement charges, interest, penalties, user fees, and grants. This is a lot of numbers on this slide, but it's trying to demonstrate the consumption values that we use in coming up with a volume rate for our customers. In 2017, we used a volume for our water of just over 2.8 million cubic meters. That was decreased from the prior year by 2%. And for 2017, the actual volumes were still 5.3% lower than that decrease due to summer weather in 2017. So for 2018, we're projecting to use a volume of 2.77 million, which is another 2% decrease again over last year. So this narrows the gap with the 2018 volume reduction, and this brings us to within the 5-year average, just below the 5-year average by 1.2%. This is a similar issue with the wastewater. Again, for both of them, last year we proposed, or we did drop volumes by 2%, and similarly with 18, we're proposing to bring them down 2% again, and this will bring us to within 0.6% of the 5-year average. And the methodology, as mentioned, is a balancing act between both base and volumetric. The goal is to have sufficient stable revenues, so that's where the municipality in managing it will prefer base revenues to reflect the nature of the primarily fixed costs, but we're trying to balance that with encouraging reduction in consumption and the fact that a volumetric weighting gives homeowners more control over their costs. The base charge for 2018 with the changes is a combined monthly base increase from $66.08 to $66.33. So not quite 0.5% increase for the base component. Just in terms of comparison to other Niagara municipalities, the base average in Niagara is approximately 42% of the monthly bill. So last year, or the current year, it's 17 for Fort Erie. This was 58% for our Fort Erie, and in 18, with the relatively smaller base charge increase, it'll bring us down to 57%. This is the highest in Niagara, and we have a plan to bring that portion relatively down to approximately 51% over the 5 years. This chart, we don't have the numbers for the last 3 years or so to update this chart, but it does demonstrate generally how the number of connections per kilometer is a primary challenge. In this case, when we look at our position, which is second last, to the others that have more per kilometer at the right side of the graph, it does show how, depending on how many connections there are per kilometer, there's that many more customers to support the significant base nature of water, wastewater budget. This graph shows the municipal burden for Fort Erie with this budget, based on the most recently available study, which was the 2016 BMA municipal study. And it shows how Fort Erie is just slightly above average when it comes to taxes and water and wastewater costs. Even so, this is a combination of comparing like residential properties and the average water and wastewater monthly bill. It does actually, just to note, it does exclude a couple of municipalities, either due to reporting, them not having reported numbers, or in the case of Waynfleet, not having a water and wastewater system. So for the budget, the volumetric rate per cubic meter is proposed to increase from 2.947 meters cubed to $3.06 per cubic meter. This is just above the 2017 Niagara average of 2.979 meters cubed. This slide, I won't go over the details of it, but it does demonstrate, if you were interested in knowing more of how the calculation occurs for both the base and volume charge, these are some of the numbers that would approximate what those charges are. And similarly for the wastewater. So when all these factors are considered for the Fort Erie 2018 water and wastewater budget, the average household consuming 16 cubic meters, the increase at the bottom line there is 1.82%, or $2.06 per month. This is higher than the Ontario CPI rate that we referenced in September's guide, which was from the July release, but again, largely reflects the increases related to treatment costs. The average cost per household increases from $3.72 per day to $3.79 per day. We did include this chart the last couple of years just to show some order of magnitude when comparing town water with other consumables for residences. Bottled water, for example, even at 25 cents per liter per bottled water is a factor of 82 times the cost of water, which includes wastewater. The current increase for the average household of 1.82% is compared to the last 5 years in this chart. The average increase for these 5 years is 2.8%. The 0% in 2014 was a result from significant decreases in regional treatment costs, as the region that year had a decrease in their budget, and the town benefited as well from a large change from a wastewater reconciliation charge to a credit. And the forecast period of 2019 to 23 has an approximate increase of 2.3% per year. Some general risks. These are fairly constant from year to year. Weather certainly is a big impact on the system, both in terms of consumption trends and maintenance costs. For example, with a mild winter, we do expect fewer water main breaks. The volumetric versus base rate is a risk in terms of having less stable revenues when there's more of a focus on a volumetric rate. The wastewater treatment adjustment we've spoken about, and we've used our rate reserves to deal with that, but that is a risk over the longer term. Any consumer shifts, particularly from potentially larger consumers, on the positive side being increases, or if we see any decreases in larger numbers, would definitely be a risk for our system. Legislative compliance, as noted. Provincial comparisons, we are relatively high on the residential rate, but we are low comparatively on the commercial and industrial rates. With reserves, we're making a lot of headway, particularly with this budget, in relation to provincial averages, and we still are targeting or aiming to reach our target contributions. Opportunities include infrastructure funding. So this year, the town's not proposing anything beyond the maturing, the repurposed debt, but for every 1% rate increase, that provides an additional $198,000 in additional capital funding. Grant funding is something we monitor ongoing with our grants oversight team, applying for any programs where possible. The meter changeout program improves our meter reading and reduces our meter reading costs. And financial sustainability, we do compare favorably with a number of comparators that are financial in nature with our asset consumption ratios and debt charge. Our debt level is quite low. So following tonight, the water and wastewater budget would come forward to council on January 22nd for bylaw approval. That would allow the January bills that are done in February to include those rates. And beyond that, for the general levy, we have presentations in January 10th for library and EDTC, and January 24th for budget and committee for the levy, as well as January 31st, if so desired, with the related bylaws on February 26th. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jansen. Another riveting presentation. But the slideshow was very good at getting to the meat of the act, and it's very appreciated by your council that you put it in that format. Very much easier to understand. Are there any questions of Mr. Jansen? Councilor Passero?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not of Mr. Jansen, but through you, and I ask this every year just because it seems to be a word that the media likes to highlight because it does come up. But through you to Mr. Walsh, I'm just hoping he could give a definition of asbestos cement, otherwise known as transite, and just to reinforce that there are no inherent risks of utilizing that. Seems to be an issue every year when we discuss our aging infrastructure.
Mr. Walsh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. AC pipe is a pipe that was used for significant both water and wastewater pipe servicing in the 60s and early 70s. As you've said, it's completely safe. It's a mixture of asbestos fibers that are entrained in reinforced concrete. The fibers themselves are used for reinforcing material. The issue with AC pipe comes about when we remove the pipe from the ground. It does require special handling at that time in case those fibers become airborne, but otherwise it's perfectly safe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Zenko?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Jansen. Could you flip back to page 14? Actually, maybe it was 13. Sorry. No. Okay, I'll save this question till last. Can you go to page 33, please? Okay. So is it fair to say, while I'm looking at this, and I know that, oftentimes we're all receiving calls with regard to the water and wastewater increase. But I just wanted to reiterate that this year the increase is lower than it has been in the past 2 years. And for audience members listening in, I just wanted to ensure that I was understanding that correctly.
Yes, you're right.
Perfect. And if you could flip to page 14, I'm looking for the relief fund page. Okay, perfect. And do you, and I don't know if you'll have this in front of you or perhaps Jillian will, but out of the allocations that we have, how much have been used in 2017?
I do have that information for the SURF program. The amount year to date that's been given out is $20,000. For the Water Emergency Relief Fund, the total year to date is $7,000.
Excellent. And do we know, $7,000 for the Water Relief Fund, and I'm constantly hearing from seniors with lower income households that they're not able to afford bills, and oftentimes I refer them to Jillian. But I'm just wondering why that is not being utilized to its full capacity, if we have any idea. Are we finding people aren't aware of it still, or?
The WRF program, or Water Emergency Relief Fund, it's through referral either by the town or the Salvation Army. The eligibility requirements are the same as the regional Niagara Emergency Energy Fund, which also provides funding for gas and heating and hydro disconnections. So it is a program that we do rely on others to provide those referrals. And certainly at every opportunity, we do encourage customers that have a challenge to contact them. But I think in prior years, if I recall from last year at this time, the amount for the WRF was higher. I'm not sure if there's any reason particularly this year why it might be lower.
Excellent. And just one other question through you, Mr. Chair. Is this going to be available on our website again, just so constituents are aware of the funding available?
I believe the Seniors Utility Relief Fund we do have on the website, and we do promote it. Applications are due annually at the end of October, I believe. And the other one, I think with the WRF, due to the referral nature, it is done more as needs are identified rather than promoting it broadly. But that's something we can look at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor McDermott. Just to stay on that, what happens at the end of the year if there's a surplus left in that particular fund, relief fund?
Through the chair to Mayor, those funds would form part of the overall surplus or deficit of the town. They are not dedicated toward or, future use, or not carried forward in any specific way.
So these funds, did you just say they go into a general reserve? So these aren't monies that are coming from the water or wastewater budget whatsoever. I wonder if we could get some background information over what the draw on these funds has been over the past, say, 4 years. And then maybe we might want to consider shifting some of these monies. I mean, it may be that if we have less of a draw on one fund but greater pressures on the other, maybe we could shift that around. But if it's possible, could we get some information, say, for the last 4 years on those two specific funds?
Certainly. And I think as town staff, we would look in terms of potentially spending an amount between the two in terms of pooling them. I think we would aim to stick to those amounts, but even within our budget policy, we can incur variances, smaller variances, or variances with the approval of the CAO. So, if we were tracking much higher on the seniors utility relief side, then I think we might make a case for transferring some of those funds within the year to allow that to be excelled.
Right, no, I would anticipate that, and thank you. If I might, Mr. Chair, so just looking at the actual budget numbers, it looks like the actuals for revenue are not going to hit target. Because I believe these actuals to date would go till the end of November, or almost the end of November?
I don't have the appendix in front of me, but in our third quarter variance report, we did comment on the fact that revenues were trending towards a deficit for 2017.
And without going to the specific slide, I believe there was an indication that over the past little while, there has been a downward trend. So we're generating, so you're anticipating that we're going to have more use because of growth, number one. But that's really reliant upon the weather, isn't it?
yes, weather is a large factor, the largest or larger than anything else. But this slide 22, does show how, despite growth, consumption continues to be in the opposite direction. So that's why, even though we quote year to year 16 cubic meters per customer, the reality is, based on the volumes in total that we see, that residential consumers and all consumers are actually using slightly less year over year. So that's why you'll see an increase in rates more than what a one-to-one ratio would otherwise produce, because there's fewer or there's less consumption year to year to base those rates on.
So, Mr. Chair, if I was selling water and I wasn't selling as much as I did last year, I would think that I'm not making as much money. Is that what's happening?
Well, this exercise aims to account for that. So we reduce our volumes, and in this case, we're looking most closely at the 5-year average, because in any given year or summer, there can be quite a variance in consumption. So we're aiming to bring the consumption down. By bringing it down in both cases 2%, we're getting within about 1% of our 5-year average. So that's the benchmark that we tend to focus on the most, knowing that consumption can vary still significantly.
And I suppose if the revenues that we're generating from billing our customers are going down, that may be offset to a great extent by the charges that we have to pay to the region for the water that we're using. So if I might just continue just along that line, with respect to the wastewater, we paid a whacking amount of money to the region for that, whatever you call that, reconciliation. 3 years ago, I think it was $900 and something thousand. You're now projecting that in 2019, it might be as low as $250,000 or thereabouts. Aside from the weather, can we take away from that the fact that we're making progress towards reducing infiltrations into our wastewater system? Or is that overly optimistic?
Yeah, Mr. Walsh would like to comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe we are. We don't have hard data in front of us right now. We're in our post-construction monitoring phase. That's been in place for a couple of years now, but it's safe to assume we are making progress on that front.
We just haven't been able to quantify it.
That's correct.
It's all anecdotal.
Dory, too.
Just, and I'm sure that we'll be able to, because I know we've got some mechanisms here that we're utilizing, plus we're taking advantage of the combined sewer overflow program from the region. Just to stay on that topic, I wonder if we can have our memories refreshed on how it is that the region calculates the volume of wastewater for which they bill us.
Mr. Chair, the billings from the region for wastewater treatment are calculated through a meter. So it's actual amounts. It's not an estimate on their part.
And because we have 2 wastewater treatment facilities in Fort Erie, that means there would be a meter for each, I presume.
That's correct.
Mr. Chair, in the past I've asked this question, and it may be that something has happened since. Is there ever an audit done of the accuracy of these meters?
Mr. Chair, that's a very, very good question. Through my meetings at Public Works officials, I have requested on numerous occasions, without success, for the meters to be part of the 2-step verification process. The first step is an annual calibration, which more or less just means the meters are working properly electronically. The second step is an actual verification, in which case they put through a known quantity of water or wastewater through the meter and get the reading as to what it is actually reading. And from that, they can verify whether their calibrations are actually correct. The region is loath to undertake the second part of that. And along with our water charge, our non-revenue water, that is a significant issue for me that I've met without success at the region.
So, Mr. Chair, is there something that council can do, perhaps a specific resolution requesting an audit? Would that be of any assistance? Maybe Mr. Walsh can comment on that.
Mr. Chair, if we can hold off on that for a month or so, or a couple of months, I'd like to bring it up again at PWO and see if I get any further traction.
That's fair enough. I think that's fair enough, but I do think that it should be made clear that this is an issue now that we've been talking about for some time. And Fort Erie has probably the highest charges, along with Port Colborne, for this type of thing. And it could very well be that it's all infiltration. And it's wonderful that the region is working with us in order to make sure that there are programs that we can tap into to help reduce that infiltrated water. But we make sure that our residents have meters that function properly. They're tested, and it doesn't seem to me that it's unreasonable for the region to satisfy its customers by making sure that its meters are functioning properly. So I would encourage the CAO and Mr. Walsh to do whatever they can to get the region to embark upon this type of exercise. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions? Councilor Roberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Jansen, can we just go back to slide 7? And maybe the one before that. That was the one with the pie chart with the, there we are, yeah, 10. All right, thank you. The regional treatment cost was 61%. Is that 61% of the bill that the people are receiving?
Mr. Jansen?
That's 61% of all expenses. So the only difference is some smaller revenues that the town generates ourselves through user fees or possibly grants. But yes, that's basically the total of all of all expenses that go into the bill.
So when the people get their bill, 61% of that bill is everything controlled by the region. And what I'm trying to get at here is we, and I'm sure that all the other councilors are the same, we're constantly getting phone calls about the cost of water and the amount that everybody's water bill is. So if 39% of that cost is is borne from the town, that's what it costs us to operate, and it's neutral revenues. So we're only responsible for 39% of the bill, and the region's responsible for 61% of the bill. Yet we get all the phone calls. I don't know, I don't hear Councilor Nunziata ever talking about the complaints that he receives. And somehow we need to get that across to the people and the consumers here that when they get their water bill, we're only responsible for 39% of what is being charged to them. And somehow that needs to get across, because I don't think that it's fair that because we send the bill out, we're the ones that get the phone calls with all the complaints. And let's just go back to slide 7. I think that was the one with the problem areas. And the $1.2 million in the problem and $4 million is the problem. I missed where the problems were. Is that because of what we're paying for untreated water, or water that's being treated that we're not billing? That the 5.2 million?
Mr. Walsh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The $1.2 million non-revenue problem is water that is billed to the town from the region but we do not collect revenue on. It's a combination of leakage and meters that don't read properly. Sometimes our back office screws up. Fire use is part of that $1.2 million issue. But essentially, the vast majority of it is water that goes from the region into our system and doesn't get billed properly. The infiltration problem, the $4 million annual problem, is a function of our high groundwater table and leaky sewers. So it's water that comes in from the ground but goes through the region's wastewater treatment meter.
And thank you very much, Mr. Walsh. What I'm trying to get at here is we can recognize this. We recognize $1.2 million problem, and we recognize a $4 million problem. Where's the reconciliation from the region? Are they recognizing it and saying, well, you're not really using that water, so we're going to give you a reduction on a certain amount? I mean, we do that when we get a phone call from a resident that says, I was away for the weekend and I had a water break and I didn't use that water. It didn't go into the sewer system. So the town of Fort Erie gives them relief and they say, okay, we'll adjust your bill accordingly and you won't pay for that treatment. The treatment portion, you just have to pay for what went through your meter. And the region doesn't have anything at all for us, any kind of relief. I mean, this is 5.2 million. This isn't something that we should just pass off and say, oh, well, that's just the way it is.
Jansen?
Yeah, you're right. And that's why a lot of these initiatives below those sections are trying to deal with that. But like Mr. Walsh said, we are trying to work with the region to increase accountability and increase ways of dealing with these losses.
Any more?
Yes, thank you very much. And I think maybe the region needs to come to the residents of Fort Erie, and they need to do the explaining instead of us doing the explaining, because they're the ones that are responsible. This is something we can't do anything about it, and they just seem to think, well, we'll just treat the water and we'll charge you accordingly, and you go ahead and figure it out, and you go talk to the customers and try to explain to them what the problem is, and they don't seem to be cooperating or trying to help us. That's just the way that I see it. And but we'll leave it at that. We'll work on that maybe next year. Slide 24 and slide 25. I just wanted to get a little better explanation. The balancing act between the base and the volumes and mitigating the shortfalls. And I spoke to the mayor about this while we were having something to eat prior to the meeting. Something that we constantly talk about when it comes to water and wastewater. It's a catch-22 here with everybody. We are projecting what the volumes are going to be for the year, and then we have to adjust our rates accordingly. If the people don't use the water and save the money, we're neutral revenue, so we have to raise the rates to adjust for that. If they use a lot of water and pay a lot of money for water, then we can reduce the rate because we have to stay neutral level revenue. That's the catch-22 there. How do we explain it? How do we get that to everybody, and how do we come to some kind of an understanding between both parties that we're not trying to take money out of their pockets, but at the same time, we can't allow money to be taken out of our pockets. We're legislated to be revenue neutral. How do we get that across? How can we better get that across?
Through the chair to Councilor Liberts, that's a great point. That is why every year, at least through the budget process, we do emphasize the balancing act nature and the struggle to to find a happy medium, because at this point, with what's proposed, the fixed portion that we're recovering through base rates is only 50%, 57% of our revenues. But the number is significantly higher that in terms of the costs that that we incur regardless of whether our customers use the water or not. So we are open to ways in communicating that better, and it's something perhaps following up as part of our communications with the rates that follow this, that we can work on with our communications to make sure that customers understand that a bit more. The graphic that we do show as well is one of the ways that we do try and demonstrate the balancing act between recovering the long line of the extensive amount of infrastructure and as well as the consumption that goes with that. So that graphically does describe that balancing act as well.
And slide 25. The base average, the Niagara base average of 42% of the monthly bill. Give me a little better explanation as to, is that the base average for all the other municipalities is 42%?
Mr. Jansen?
That means that for the average regional municipality, 42% of what they're billing on a monthly basis is coming from the base component that they charge, and 58% is coming from volume charges. So we flip that a bit on its head. And while we think there's very good reason to charge a higher base rate because it reflects the structure of our costs, that is why we're aiming to meet in the middle, so to speak, in reaching more of a 50-50% allocation. But 42% is the average for all municipalities of what the base portion represents.
And the base portion, what does that pay for?
The base portion is the method that we split the total costs we need to raise. So we need to raise $18.5 million. We split that. We bill 57% of that through a fixed monthly portion. So there's little or no risk in recovering those costs. But then the remaining portion is based depending on what we project we will experience or what our customers will experience in volumes that they consume. So it's intended to recover in this way, the way we've budgeted all of our costs. It's a cost neutral, full cost recovery system, but it's just the proportions that we are making stable fixed versus a volume charge.
So just so that everybody's clear, if we're being charged, or if it's costing $18 million a year for water and wastewater throughout the town of Fort Erie, if we get to, let's just say we were at the 50% mark, 50%, so that we would bill $9 million at a base rate, and then your consumption rates are based on the other $9 million. Is that correct? So when people get their bill, they're looking at a base rate of what, it's a number. So the base rate is so much, and then the rest of your bill is so much. But that base rate, because a lot of people come to me and they say, well, why am I paying a base rate? I'm paying half of my bill is for just to be a customer. And it's not just to be a customer. That is actually a base so that we don't charge them for the metering, 100% of metering. We give them base rate, and then the rest of it goes on. That needs to be explained to the average consumer as well, because there's a lot of people that think that that base rate is just a cash grab. And I think we can get that out there and explain a little bit better as to how that bill goes. because this is the biggest problem that I have when it comes to billing, even more than the taxes, is our water bills. And our water bills are way too high. We got a lot of people moving in from other municipalities, and I understand why they're complaining. They have more connections per kilometer than we do, and trying to get into all of that doesn't help. All they know is that they pay a lot of money for water in this town, and we need to better explain that it's totally revenue neutral. We're not making any money on it. At the same time, we're not losing. And just getting back at just piggyback on what Mayor Redekop was saying about the region's meter, how they meter the water that comes in. If we look through the industry, not just water and wastewater, but any industry, and especially when we go to the gas station to fill up our cars or trucks, those gas pumps have to be calibrated. They have to be inspected on a regular basis, right? That's legislated. I can't believe that the province would just sit back and not regulate water or wastewater, especially when, you know, there's millions of dollars of revenues that is being either collected or overly collected. And we might want to look at the province, to ask the province if they could legislate that these meters are calibrated on a regular basis. That's all I have to say, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Can I just, with respect to that point about the base rate and the usage rate, this is really no different than any other utility bill. It's just that we don't describe it that way. It's like a delivery charge, so you see on your hydro bill or your gas bill, so much for delivery, which really talks about your infrastructure, how you get the product from the plant to the house. So really our base is a great reflection of that. We've got the infrastructure that has to be maintained, which includes the pipes from the region's water mains to the houses. And then we've got the product charge, which is our fluctuating rate. So there, I think Councillor Lubitz is quite correct. We could be getting something out through our communications with respect to a little bit better explanation of what these charges are, because there is actually a philosophy here. The philosophy is heavily affected by the fact that we acquire the product from the region, which, as has been pointed out, we pay 60% or more with respect to the charges. So maybe we could look at getting something out.
Councilor Pissarro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've spoke at length about the accuracy of meters. I'm wondering, through you to Mr. Walsh, if he could just briefly reiterate something I learned very early on in my first term, which is that when a water meter falters, at least with the style of meter that we utilize to capture volume, it doesn't falter to the benefit of the municipality. And I think that's kind of a myth out there that's, you know, my meter's not working properly, you're overbilling me. I'm hoping he could clarify that.
Mr. Walsh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilor Pissarro is correct. When a meter fails, it typically reads slow, and that the user would maintain the benefit on that. We have done a degradation study on meters we're pulling out of homes, and we're finding 15-year-old meters are still reading at 90% accuracy, but it's still 10% of the water that we're not capturing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that also speaks to, if you look at our contribution from operating into our reserve, specifically water meter replacement, that's one of the reasons why we spend so much annually on replacement of meters, is because the longer we wait to replace them, the more that we're losing on the revenue side as far as capturing what people are utilizing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to reports. Can I get a mover for CBC 02, 2018, 2018 fees and charges? Councilor Zanko. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you, carried. Can I get a mover for CBC 03, 2018 water and wastewater operating budget? Councilor Butler? Are there any comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. The date of the next meeting, EDTC and library budget, Wednesday, January 10, 2018. B, the general levy operating budget and assessment analysis, Wednesday, January 24, 2018. And Wednesday, January 31st, 2018, if necessary. Motion to adjourn?
I
All in
move.
favor?
So, I'm going to call the special council meeting to order. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
All members of council are present, your worship, with the exception of Councilor Nutt.
Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest with respect to the matter that's on the closed session agenda? If not, Councilor Zanko, you have a resolution for us to go into closed session?
Yes, thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Basiro, that council does now go into closed session at 7:09 p.m. to discuss the following. Pursuant to Section 239(2)(c) of the Municipal Act 2001, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of lands by the municipality or local board.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried.
We're very particular and qualified.
It's clear. I can't believe how clear it is.
Yeah, well, this one, we don't want it on the mayor, we want it to pull back
Yeah.
because the mayor's.
The last guy sitting there was better looking.
We're just playing with the system, but. It's 12. That's what he said, he's shooting for the 12th, unless
It was just the report. So when
that insurance. Yeah, it's been in, I've been thinking about it, so.
and then when soon as I shut that down,
Uh,
it goes live. How we shut it off.
Nobody knows we're on
But otherwise, filling it out right now.
I was on tonight, I was watching. So was Kelly. There was only
This is
three,
how it'll
three
look.
watchers
So
tonight, because nobody knows.
So if you press yours,
So we're just doing the pilot. But that's,
that's kind of how.
you
You know what?
I just
I'm up for all
realized-
offers, actually.
My daughter has it. Every time she takes a picture of herself,
Can you
she's
imagine?
like she's lost 30 pounds. I'm like, called Thin Boost. A filter
That's
that
another
goes
budget item. we'll have to put in.
Yeah, really.
Special
Approved.
camera.
That's what I just said. I said the burrito was over there. Oh my God, no!
So we need individual cameras everywhere? You want camera?
I'm gonna start wearing a robe.
I can't wait for that day that you
Okay,
do.
so the mayor isn't capturing this. But I think he's capturing that. Yeah, so
And I
he's
have another question for you. So I know that there's
trying to figure out which one to capture him in, because we want to pull back. So if we
incentive programs that come for that grant.
go. He's zoomed in, but we really, we don't want him to be zoomed in. We want it to be a full shot of the whole place. That's our home. When nobody's speaking, it just goes back. We can capture him either on this one with side or this side. Yeah. And then that one, on to the presenter. And you- what do you- change? You're. I can see you. Oh, perfect. Yeah. Okay, so that works. Because when we have a presentation, it shows. So when you guys go to yeah, we could actually just put something on the laptop, like just a slide.
Mm-hmm.
Automatically come up, say in closed session, returning,
Yeah.
whatever, right? Yeah. Yeah, we'll work on that.
Mm-hmm.
Check, check.
I almost got scared to death when I saw that guy in the screen. Okay. George, your seconder? We got the clerk here, why don't we get moving? So I'll call this, we're back in open session now, Councilor Pacero.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a motion moved by myself, seconded by Councilor McDermott, that council does now rise and reconvene from closed session at 8:30 PM with report that staff proceed as directed.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And Councilor Lubert, you have the next resolution.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. Moved by myself and seconded by Councilor McDermott that bylaw number 133-2017 to confirm the actions of council at its special meeting held on December 6, 2017 is given first and second reading.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Next resolution is Councilor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McDermott, that bylaw number 133-2017 is given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and clerk under the corporate seal.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Councilor McDermott, over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Butler, the council adjourns at 8:31 PM to reconvene into a regular meeting of council on December 11th, 2017.
All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you.